Roundtable on EU-China at 50.
Welcome back to this second roundtable discussion about China and EU for its 50th anniversary, the state of the bilateral relations in a changing world. So how will be these relations impacting the world social order and the security order? 所以呢，今天我们非常荣幸的请到
We're very honored to have all of you, and the moderator for this session is Dr. Wang Huiyao and Ambassador Declan Kelleher from European Policy Center, former Irish ambassador to China.
Mr. Wang Huiyao, who is the founder and president of CCG and also former counselor to China State Council, and Ambassador Mr. Declan Kelleher, who is the chair of the governing board of European Policy Center and also former Irish ambassador to China. Welcome.
Okay, Your Excellency, Ambassador Toledo, and Excellencies, and so roundtable distinguished guests and participants, colleagues, and friends. Good morning. So it's really a great honor to welcome all of you to this policy dialogue roundtable. EU-China at 50, the state of a bilateral relation in a changing world. So this is really a very important, significant roundtable that we're having at this annual event. So this year's mark a significant milestone, 50 years of relations between China and the European Union. It's a moment to both to reflect on the achievement of the past 50 years, but also explore how we can strengthen cooperation among a rapidly evolving global landscape. I'm especially honored to co-chair this dialogue with Ambassador Declan Kelleher, chair of the governing board of the European Policy Center, a former Irish ambassador to China, one of the longest Irish-serving ambassadors to China, but also leading this EU think tank delegation. So the event is held in partnership, this event, European Policy Center, where I think Fabian is also the president of this EPC, which CCG has worked closely as the Chinese counterpart in this China-EU think tank engagement project. We had also many our think tank colleagues from Chinese different think tanks participate as this roundtable today. This initiative funded by the European Union has now been ongoing for several years, and it aims to build a long-term effective mechanism for exchange and cooperation between European and Chinese think tanks. Over the past several years, under this project, CCG and EPC has held multiple exchanges in Beijing and Europe, producing research papers and analyses that deepen understanding of EU-China relation. Most recently, from April 22nd to 23rd, 2025, just last month, CCG participated in a seminar in Madrid, co-hosted by EPC and Econo Royal Institute. This seminar also brought a number of experts from China and also talked with European counterparts to share insights on how the two sides can find a common ground and work together. This was especially important given the renewed trade tensions under the second Trump administration and current global economic uncertainties. 50 years of EU-China relation as a remarkable history built on mutual respect, shared interest, and culture exchange. This relationship benefits from unique geography linking Europe and Asia, and from both sides, economic strength and innovation. And of course, we have seen recently a great improvement. President Xi has talked with European leaders on the telephone, and we see a number of senior officials visiting China. Just as 2 days ago, President Xi also phoned President Macron, and of course we have many visit. Mr. Wang Yi was talking to many counterparts in European countries, including German new foreign minister. So recently, China also decided to lift the sanctions on members of the European Parliament, and EU do the same, signaling a positive step towards improved relations. Additionally, China and the European Union have vowed to jointly uphold the multilateral trading system with WTO at its core, and China's potential accession to the comprehensive agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, also see the interest from European Union would open a new avenues for expanding the free trade area and strengthening global economic governance. So today, as we engage in dialogue, the shared goal is to promote pragmatic cooperation, overcome geopolitical uncertainties, and jointly hold and develop rule-based international order that benefit both China, Europe, and of course, indeed, a wider world. So thank you very much for participation. And I'd really hand out to our co-chair, Ambassador Declan Kelleher, to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Henry. It's a great honor for me to be asked to be co-chair of this very important session. Henry has spoken very eloquently, and I very much agree with what he said. But let me just thank the CCG for organizing this session under the EU-China Think Tank Exchange Project. Let me also thank the European Union for supporting the project. And let me also recognize and thank think tank colleagues who traveled here and who've made the trip from many places, including Europe, and all the other participants who are taking part in these dialogues. I particularly want to recognize our two distinguished speakers, Ambassador Jorge Toledo, who's an old friend, and also Minister Peng Gang. And I think we look forward very much to what they will have to say. I would also just, on a housekeeping point, note that will be a closed-door roundtable this afternoon as part of the EU-China 50 project. And finally, if I may, I'd like to thank the members of the EPC team here, Fabian Zulig-Albert-Muller, and also in particular, Ivano Di Carlo, who has performed extremely valuable preparatory work. So with that, I look forward very much to this session. I'm delighted to see so many old friends here, and I hand back to you.
So now we'll be extremely happy and honored to invite a great friend of China, Ambassador Toledo, who has been here for several years and has been often a keynote at the CCG annual forum, and also probably one of the most active diplomats in Beijing. We like to hear from you at this really improved Sino-EU relation, and we look forward. So your speech will be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Henry and Mabel, thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you, Declan and Fabian. Thank you very much for inviting me for the third time to this forum. It's the second time I'm addressing this forum because last year I think something happened and it was somebody from the delegation who addressed the forum. Always delighted to see you all here, to see frank and free discussion happening in Beijing is always good. We support, we finance this exercise. I think it's an increasingly important exercise and one of the best examples of people-to-people exchanges that are increasingly needed in our relation between the European Union and China. What I will try to transmit is my impression, our impression, I would say the impression we have in the European Union, in Brussels, in the EU institutions about their relations between the European Union and China in this very particular year. It's very particular because we are commemorating, I have spent about 2 weeks celebrating our 50th anniversary of our relations. And this is an opportunity to take stock of what has happened in the last 50 years, to see what challenges we have now, and to lay the ground for a prosperous future relations between the EU and China. I will be, as you know, I'm quite frank. So I will again be try to be objective and try to be frank, but also try to be optimistic. And this is a particular moment, not only because we are celebrating or commemorating our 50th anniversary, because of the obvious geopolitical situation. We in the European Union, China here, and the world need that we stabilize our relations, we rebalance our relation, and we improve our relation. The world doesn't need another trade war. The world doesn't need more geopolitical conflicts. So we have a special responsibility in the European Union and in China to stabilize, rebalance, and improve our relationship, and not to add more problems to the already very troubled waters that we are witnessing in the world. So, what has happened over the last 50 years? One thing is what the world has witnessed the most rapid, fastest, and impressive growth in the history of humankind, China's growth. I remember when I came here for the first time in my life in 1989, China's per capita income was $300 US. Now it's 13,000. China was an underdeveloped country at that time. Now it's a developed, industrial, very developed country. Yesterday I was sometimes I'm told when I say China is no longer a developing country that you must go to the provinces and all. Yesterday I was in Hongjian, very far from everywhere. I was so impressed by the infrastructure there. So, and everywhere I go, I will dwell on that later. So we have witnessed that, and in the European Union, we have witnessed enlargement. In 1975, when we started our relation, there were 9 member states. Now there are 27. We lost one on the way, unfortunately. But we're getting closer again to the UK. And we have deepened our integration. By far, the European Union is the regional organization with the deepest integration, where member states have to abide by rules that they have opposed. This is unprecedented in the world, and it's affecting more and more areas of competence. And we hope that in the future will affect the very core of sovereignty, which is the political and security policy. So lots of things have happened in the European Union and in China. At the same time, we have increased our relation, our economic, trade, people-to-people relations a lot. In 1975, the trade between what is now the European Union and China was maybe 2 billion, the equivalent to 2 billion euros a year. Now it's more than 2 billion euros a day. Last time I checked, it was 365 times more. So the incredible growth of exchanges has also brought imbalances. So it is extremely important that now both the European Union, we are convinced in the European Union, but it is very important now that in China, they realize, they admit that this has created imbalances, and that some of these imbalances, as we will see, are no longer sustainable. So we need to address these imbalances. As I said, we need to find common ground because it is very important for China, for the European Union, and for the world that we stabilize and that we rebalance our relationship. So I know the Chinese government does not like the description of our relationship as three-faceted. You know, we say we are partners, we are competitors, but we are also systemic rivals. Well, let's start with the partnership. Yesterday, I was in Yichun, in Hongjian, for the Biodiversity Day. That was the third time I went to a Biodiversity Day, and this only invited by the Minister of Environment and Ecology, who finally couldn't make it. But anyway, I went there for the third time in 3 years, first time in Kunming, second time in Hainan, yesterday in Yichun, Hongjian. I was so impressed by the massive forest and the biodiversity there. But this is to say that we have a very good partnership when it comes to fight against climate change, protection of biodiversity. We were key, China and the European Union were key to the success of Kunming, Montreal, and then Cali, Rome, biodiversity action, and we were also key to the success of climate negotiations in Azerbaijan and in Abu Dhabi. And what is more important, without our common action, more than ever, there is nothing useful we can do. I mean, now with the United States withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, it is even more important that we increase our ambition. We hope that the United States, even if they withdraw from the Paris Agreement, will help via the states. But in any case, it is more important than ever that we increase our ambition. So we have a very good relation. We are going to hold the high-level dialogue on climate and environment on the 14th of July here in Beijing. Vice President Rivera plus 2 commissioners will come. So this would be a very good opportunity for us to continue cooperating, and we will again be crucial for the success of the next COP on climate. But let me say what we are asking from China. It's very clear. We are asking China to increase its ambition. We know that, I read the other day, everybody knows that China has already peaked from a very high level, by the way. It has peaked in carbon. But we are asking China to put that in the new national objective, because they have already peaked much before they were supposed to. They were supposed to peak in 2030. Well, they have already peaked, but we see a reluctance from China to announce a higher ambition and a shortest peak. It is very important, especially now. We are also asking China to stop adding coal capacity. It's not time to do that. Still, 60% of the production of electricity in China is produced by coal. China is adding more coal capacity than the rest of the world put together. And finally, China, although it's improving, China is the highest contributor to greenhouse emission in the world, 30%. It's true that per capita, the United States is higher, but it's also true, I mean, it's no longer true what China was saying a few years ago, that historical emissions of China are lower than the EU and the United States. No. Historical emissions of China since 1850 till last year are already higher than the European Union. So there is no reason why China will not have an ambitious target to reduce its greenhouse emission. And there is no reason why China continues hiding behind a classification of 1990 which exempts China from contributing to global funds against climate change. There is absolutely no reason. China will very soon, next year or the following, be a high-income country. It's already an upper high-income country. As I said, you cannot say, at least in order not to pay into multilateral funds, that you are a developing country anymore. When China is the highest emitter of greenhouse gases. And we have to tell our friends from the global south. It doesn't, we know that China does South-South cooperation. Last time I checked, China was not in the south, but anyway. Bilateral cooperation is not the same as multilateral. We are being criticized by China and others because we don't put enough money in multilateral. We are by far in the European Union the first contributor to these multilateral funds. We need China, especially now that the US has withdrawn, we need China to contribute, to join us in contributing to these multilateral funds. So, again, we can find common ground and improve our partnership there, and we hope that this high-level dialogue will be instrumental for that. Let's go to our systemic rivalry, the other extreme of our relations. And, well, we have many differences. We have political systems that are different. We have a different concept of human rights. We have a different narrative of human rights. And we have a different narrative on rule of law or democracy. Fine. We are not going to change the Chinese political system. We know. But let's go to what has tainted our relationship for the last 3 years, which is Chinese position on the Russian aggression on Ukraine. Yes, it has tainted our relationship. It has painted, it has darkened our relationship. Why? Because no matter how many times we have said, myself and my European Union ambassador colleagues, that this is existential for Europe and that we can not understand the Chinese political and diplomatic support to Russia in this case. We have been told about historical reasons for that and all, but, well, for us, it is existential. And when we see that China has been supporting in the Security Council and many multilateral fora the Russian position, well, this is a big problem for us. We must admit that lately we have seen some movement. Like, for instance, we recognize that China, for the first time, voted with us to amend a resolution in the Security Council, trying to add the respect of territorial integrity and sovereignty to a resolution, to a draft resolution, which, and this is what is happening now, very sadly, was vetoed, well, of course, by Russia, but by the United States. So, and we praise and we commend China for putting, more than ever, I would say, territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine in the first place. We were told the other day there are 4 principles, and the first one is territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. That's good. But then the second and third principles, when we talk about root causes or legitimate security concerns, as if they were justification for what has happened, as if they were principles that had to be redressed in any peace agreement, we cannot understand that, because there is no legitimate security concern. There can be no root cause to what happened on the 24th, 24th of February, 22, what is happening every day. So we don't understand that in Europe. And this is a bad factor for our relation. So let's see what happens now. Again, we have the opportunity to find common ground. And there have been movements, positive movements, I think, by China. We are always told that China's position on the Ukraine conflict is consistent and clear, but well, at least territorial integrity is put in the first place. I know that it is very important for China. Territorial integrity, sovereignty, also, may I remind you, non-interference in internal affairs, because never forget that one of the main objectives of the Russian aggression, of Putin's aggression on Ukraine, was to topple the Ukrainian government. So these are principles that are very dear to China and very dear to the European Union. We have common ground. Let's work on it. And now it's time for us, we are doing that, and for China to press Russia to start immediately a ceasefire for 30 days. Immediately. And condition, of course, because as you see, Putin is putting conditions like that go directly against these principles that are very dear to China and to the European Union. Principles like give up Crimea or give up the Donbass, etc. So this cannot be supported by China. So let's find, again, common ground. We will have an opportunity to discuss this, by the way, on the 2nd of July, when Director Foreign Minister Wang Yi visits Brussels to meet High Representative Kallas, who, as everybody knows, is very concerned about the Russian aggression on Ukraine. So let's try and find some better and proved common ground. And finally, let us see what has happened in what we call the competition part of our relationship. Competition, which we don't mean in the same way as our friends, the Americans. When we say competition, it's competition. But what we want is fair competition. And forgive me if I say that we are not finding fair competition, and that it is not only not improving, it is getting worse and worse. And lately, it is getting seriously worse. And I'm talking, and we are having meetings here in Brussels about it, about the new export controls on rare earths and materials by China. We all read that in the famous Geneva Agreement between China and the US, China was canceling the retaliatory measures against the United States, which included export controls on 8 rare earths and materials, which are vital for many industries in Europe, in the United States, and everywhere. Well, it's not happening. It's not happening. So China is adding an extremely bad measure to what the EUCC has listed at 1,058 market access barriers. Well, we have a new and extremely serious problem. I'm saying this because this is extremely bad for our companies, who are finding that vital materials are not being exported from China to Europe. Well, After all, they were measures against the US, first of all, so not against us. That it's not that we agreed with that at all, but they were not against that. Then they were supposedly lifted. But not only have they not been lifted, but they are affecting our industries very seriously. So, but let me talk in general terms so that to give you the larger picture of what's happening. From 2017 to 2024, Chinese economy grew 40%. The GDP in China grew by 40%. By far the largest, the fastest growth in the world. So when a country grows so much, you can expect that the market gets larger for its partners. Well, the European Union exports went down by 30% in the same period. From 2017 to 2024, our exports went down by 30%. In 2022, the European Union-China trade reached a Guinness Book of Records, historical Guinness Book of Records of a trade deficit. Never in history had anybody had a trade deficit as large as that. So in 23 and 24, in terms of value, it went down a little bit. In terms of volume, because of the Chinese industrial deflation, it went up. And the first 3-4 months is going up very rapidly again. This is not sustainable. And it's not that we are looking for a perfect balanced trade. We are not doing reciprocal tariffs or something like this. We want a level playing field, fairness. And we are faced with discrimination in public procurement. We are faced with public procurement for European companies who are manufacturing in China. I mean, some of these measures are making the business case for our companies in China impossible. I must say. So, and now, with the trade war with the United States, well, there is a trade diversion risk, which is very, very high, which is already happening. You can see it in the numbers of trade between the European Union and China in the month of April. And we are saying that we are not going to allow that. President von der Leyen said when she came here in the last summit on the 7th of December 2023, basically China has to really open up, has to stop putting barriers to our companies. Otherwise, we will start putting barriers. But what we are going to do, what we are doing already, and we will do, is just reciprocate, not with reciprocal tariffs, but for instance, in public procurement, if we see, as we have seen, it's already proved in the European Union, that our medical devices companies are being discriminated in public procurement by the Chinese provinces, well, we will do the same with Chinese companies in Europe. It's only fair. So these kind of things we need to address. And let me tell you one thing. We are having technical negotiations in Brussels and here about market access barriers, about EV tariffs, about Chinese investments in Europe, possible. That's at the very, very preliminary stage. And now we have to start discussions on export controls and all. So we're finding more and more issues. And let me tell you something. They are not making progress. So this is very concerning. They are not making progress. So much so that we were supposed to hold a high-level economic and trade dialogue, and I'm afraid we are not going to hold it because I mean, in order to hold it, we need progress, we need deliverables. You know, this famous brandy cognac tariff anti-dumping investigation, which was, and it is being recognized by MOFCOM, retaliation because of our EV very targeted tariffs. So we see that for the first time in the history, cognac, which is a very expensive product, is the target of an anti-dumping investigation, which is unprecedented. Fine. It is hit with provisional tariffs, which make almost, I mean, it makes cognac and brandy so much more expensive that it is, again, destroying the business case for cognac here in China, which, by the way, our EV tariffs are not destroying in Europe. But, well, we take China to WTO. Fine, it will take some time, and we will win, I'm sure, because it doesn't make sense to an anti-dumping investigation on cognac, which is much more expensive here than in Paris. I mean, you go to... So, but on top of that, and against a clear WTO regulation which bans anti-dumping duties to be collected when the product is destined to duty-free shops, all cognac and brandy that was destined to duty-free and shops in China is blocked. And we are told by MOFCOM that they know this is banned by WTO, but they have a national regulation that allows it, which is applied for the first time since 2009 and is blatantly against WTO, because you cannot oppose a national regulation to a WTO, which is an international commitment. But anyway, the brand is still there. And Vice Premier He Feng was in Paris last week. They discussed this and no progress at all. So, again, there is a lot of room for improvement. I'm afraid there is more and more room every day because the situation is getting worse and worse. So we need progress. We need deliverables, and we are not getting it. And let me also be very clear, because I know, I mean, our Chinese interlocutors always say that the situation would improve if we ratified CAI, if we allowed ASML machines to be exported to China, or if we fix the EV tariffs. I don't see, there is absolutely nothing. EV tariffs affect less than 2% of Chinese exports to the European Union. ASML machines are being exported to China, and last year they hit a record export to China. And CAI has nothing to do with all this. So let me be very clear. CAI, ASML, or EV tariffs have nothing to do with it. And we have to talk about what we feel is an unlevel playing field. Let's talk about that. And let me finish with people to people. We think that China's measures on exempting from visas most of our member states, not all. I take this opportunity to ask China why haven't all member states been included in this waiver of visas. That's good. We have to go back to our tourist exchanges, especially when it comes to European tourists coming to China. And I hope that will improve. Another good news is this. We are discussing, and think tanks are discussing. Let me take this opportunity to say two things about our sanctions. I mean, as Henry said, China has lifted sanctions against the European Parliament. Let me be very clear. We have not lifted sanctions, our sanctions. That, I mean, the Chinese sanctions were taken in 2021, I think, in retaliation of our sanctions. Our sanctions, which affected, I think, 4 individuals and 1 entity. And we were hit by completely disproportionate sanctions against the European Parliament, European parliamentarians, and entities, and that's where I want to go. The sanctions have been lifted against sanctions against the European Parliament and European parliamentarians, but not against entities. 2 of them should have been here today. Medics and the Alliance for Democracy in Denmark. I don't know why they were hit with sanctions. It would have been a very good opportunity to lift the sanctions against that, because they, last time I checked, they had not. They are 2 of the best think tanks about China we have in Europe. So I hope that next year we will enjoy their presence in this. And by the way, they participate when this happens in Brussels. And also, they should have taken the opportunity to lift the sanction on the Political and Security Committee of the European Union, because it doesn't make sense. It's like hitting the 27 member states. We all member states have an ambassador in this committee, and they are all under sanctions. We don't understand if it's personally or not. So what we did, not we, the European Parliament, because the European Parliament cannot lift sanctions. It is the Council. So what the European Parliament did, and I think it was a good decision, is to lift restrictions of official contacts between the European Parliament and China. And this is also good news. So this is the state of affairs, but I want to be optimistic that once we realize and we admit the state of affairs, we know where we have to go to improve our relationship. And I think I have given a fair, realistic description, which leaves a large room for improvement. And I hope that we will hold this opportunity, we will use this opportunity of the 50th anniversary and the forthcoming summit, probably at the end of July, to make progress, because as I said, it is very important for us, for China, for the European Union, and for the world. We have to provide stability, predictability, fairness, and balance to a very troubled world. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Toledo, for your frank and straightforward speech, and at this China-EU policy roundtable. I think this is really a platform for exchange and dialogue. So thank you for all the points. But just briefly, I would like to respond a little bit, because you talk about energy consumption. I think China actually is making huge progress on the green energy, and actually President Xi, when he mentioned China going to achieve carbon peak, is not by 2030, it's before. You need to see the word, magnifying glass. He was saying before, so China could put that ahead of schedule. And I'm very glad to report now renewable energy now is already over 50% of China's power generation. So we are in the right direction there, and also the new energy EV car. China is doing great things on the new EV cars, on the solar panels and wind power, and an EV car already counts about 60% of global consumption in China. Most of the cities in China, over half of its vehicles is EV cars now. So China, I think, is doing things in the right direction. And also, you mentioned about China's contribution to to multilateral institutions. Just a few days ago, China's Vice Premier announced China going to donate $500 million to WHO. So China is still working very hard with EU, with many others to work on those multilateral institutions, and I'm sure also on WTO. And also on the Russian-Ukraine war there, I think that I just noticed China Foreign Minister Wang was at BRICS foreign minister meeting, and he actually made a statement that China and BRICS countries can be a very good mediator, peacemaker for the Russian-Ukraine conflict, and also that I was at the Munich Security Conference. We hear the Defense Secretary said, for the peacekeeping, that U.S. will not send any troops. It has to be European troops and non-European troops. So non-European troops could mean India and Japan, India and South Africa or Brazil and China. China is the largest peacekeeping force sending country among the P5 member countries of UN. So there's a possibility that China could be more actively involved with other BRICS countries to guarantee the peace in the Ukraine and Russia war. So finally, on a tariff on EV, I'm very glad to see that we are having a new discussion on how to have the price limit for that now, rather than focus 40-30 tariff on the EV cars. And absolutely, I would think the CAI, revive the comprehensive agreement on investment between China and EU would be absolutely so important. Director Sun Yongfu, former Director General of European Affairs at the MOFCOM, was involved many years, and 7 years actually negotiating of this CAI. So much achievement. And the former European ambassador, Nicholas, also came to my office. He said, this is the China's second opening up, and EU has achieved many more things before US. Used to be just follow US, now EU is taking lead. So I hope that this CAI can be resolved. And also one of the good things I would report is since China lifted visa for so many EU countries, we see a big surge of bilateral tourism and discussion. So really, it's all great news. But I hope that perhaps our minister from European delegation, former Minister of Trade from European delegation from MOFCOM, Mr. PENG can say a few words as opening as well. And I'm sure Ambassador Declan will moderate that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Wang, founder and president of CCG. Thank you so much, Ambassador co-chair, Ambassador Declan. And I am very much honored and very glad to just enjoy the remarks just now by Ambassador George Toledo. So, dear ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, very good morning. It gives me really a great pleasure and honored to be invited to today's seminar and speak on the theme of 50 years of China-EU relations. As I just returned to Beijing from the beautiful city of Brussels not long ago, 2 months before, it makes me feel very much cordial to join Excellency ambassadors and all the experts and scholars today to discuss on the theme of China-EU relations, especially focus on the 50 years anniversary celebration of this year. So let me just focus on the theme. The 50 years anniversary of diplomatic relations is an important moment that bridges the past to the future of China-EU ties. Over the past 50 years, China-EU relations have transcended the Cold War and withstood numerous tests and have always maintained an overall forward and positive development trend, with strategic mutual trust deepening, economic and trade exchanges expanding, people-to-people exchanges becoming increasingly extensive, and multilateral coordination been very much fruitful. China-EU relations have become one of the most influential bilateral relations in the world. And I think just now, His Excellency Ambassador Toledo just mentioned the importance of our bilateral relations. So over the past 50 years, we have respected each other and moved forward hand in hand. China-EU relations have evolved from the establishment of diplomatic relations to the comprehensive partnership, and then to the comprehensive strategic partnership. The China-EU summit has gone through 24 meetings, and the two sides have also established high-level dialogues in strategy, economy and trade, digital affairs, environment and climate, and people-to-people exchanges, as well as more than 70 consultation and dialogue mechanisms. So over the past 50 years, we have achieved mutual benefits and common growth. Like mentioned just now by Excellency Ambassador, that you see the annual trade volume between China and the EU has grown from $2.4 billion at the beginning of the establishment of diplomatic relations to more than $780 billion last year. And the stock of mutual investment has increased from almost zero to more than $260 billion. So we have achieved a fruitful result in cooperation of finance, environmental protection, culture, education, tourism, customs, so on and so forth. Our cooperation in emerging fields such as digital economy, new energy, and artificial intelligence is making robust progress. We have become one of each other's most important trade and investment cooperation partners. And also, over the past 50 years, we have jointly upheld multilateralism and promoted world peace and development. Both China and the EU uphold the international system and international order, with the United Nations at its core and the multilateral trading system with the WTO at its core. So the two sides have carried out fruitful multilateral coordination and cooperation in a wide range of areas, playing an important role in improving global governance and promoting the international order in a more just and reasonable direction. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. So with the size and depth of our cooperation, I think it's natural that we sometimes face differences and frictions. In recent years, some in Europe have expressed an anxiety about competitiveness between the EU and China. And also some politicians calling for reducing dependence or de-risking on China. And at the same time, certain countries like the United States, the biggest country and the most powerful country in the world, continue to act recklessly, adopting unilateralism, protectionism, and hegemonism practices indiscriminately, which seriously undermines global trade rules and international fairness. But as President Xi Jinping pointed out in his congratulatory message marking our 50th anniversary, China and the EU are not only competitive strategic partners, but also two major forces for building a multipolar world, two major markets supporting globalization, and two major civilizations championing diversity. A sound and stable China-EU relationship not only works to the advantage of both sides, but also brings benefits to the whole world. China and the EU have neither conflicting fundamental interests nor geopolitical contradictions. Our consensus far exceeds our differences, and our cooperation far outweighs competition. So we are partners, not rivals. Personally, I cannot resist this kind of three conceptions. China has always believed that those who share the same ideals are partners. Those who seek common ground despite differences are also very important partners. So I fully agree His Excellency's remarks just now. The world need no more conflict, need no more trade war. That's very correct. So after 50 years of development, our relationship has become more mature and resilient. We have mechanisms and experience in place to manage differences between China and the EU and also European countries. In today's complex and uncertain world, as long as we respect each other, engage in equal dialogue, and work together while accommodating each other's concerns, we can overcome challenges, manage disagreements, and face global issues together. So China is ready to work with the EU side to further strengthen our high-level exchanges and deepen practical cooperation in various fields. So we look forward to holding the new round of China-EU summit during this year, as well as high-level strategic, economic and trade, grain, and digital dialogues. We can align our development strategies by exploring synergies between the Belt and Road Initiative and the EU's Global Gateway. And we can support each other's modernization and integration efforts. We can also enhance our communications, expand mutual openness, and work together to jointly safeguard free and open trade and investment, and maintain the stability and smooth flow of the global industrial and supply chains. I also understand His Excellency just now mentioned a lot of more issues like address a trade imbalance and also some other trade and political issues. But let's leave some room for further discussion today. And we can further strengthen exchanges and cooperation on major issues concerning the future of mankind, such as global environment protection, climate change, and artificial intelligence. China also welcomes deeper cooperation with the EU under the UN, WTO, G20, and other frameworks to jointly address global challenges, including some other regional issues. So together, we can promote a more balanced and inclusive global order and inject more certainty and positive energy into an uncertain world. So distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, and the 50th anniversary is not only a milestone, but it's also a new starting point. With joint efforts, I believe China-EU relations can forge ahead into another promising 50 years. All of you here are supporters, participants, and contributors to this kind of very sound relationship. So I hope you will continue to use your expertise and wisdom to generate new ideas, draw lessons from the past, and help steer China-EU relations towards greater stability and lasting progress for the benefit of peace, development, and prosperity worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Peng. And could I now invite, and it gives me great pleasure to invite former Director General of Ministry of Commerce, Sun Yong-fu, who's Senior Fellow of the CCG, to speak. We know each other of old, so I'm looking forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Declan. Yeah, we know each other for many years, and we both accompanied our President Xi Jinping, to visit your beautiful country that time. So I could recall when I was the Director General of European Department of MOFCOM, well, that was about a little bit more than 12 years. And I could recall that more or less the golden years of China-EU economic relations. If we review our 50 years anniversary, and we can see in 1975, well, the trade between us is only 2.4 billion US dollars, and less than 1% of the EU total, so it's nothing. But last year, it was about 785.8 billion US dollars, 330 times of that year of 75. So you can see the progress which has been made by joint efforts of both China and EU member states. So China and EU, we are both the second largest trading partners right now. But as Ambassador Toledo mentioned, time is changing, and situation and structure of the economic cooperation and trade structure is also changing. At the very beginning, China invited a lot of investment and technology from EU, and EU also enjoying the huge market of China. And for example, the leading three companies of the German car companies, China is the most important, market for those countries. And China is also for the luxury goods from France, Italy, Spanish, and for those very famous and luxury goods. Here, China is a very important market, even now, I think, and also for the agricultural projects. But with the development of Chinese economy, and China is moving ahead. So as you mentioned, competition is getting more and more serious. We need fair competition. I think what is common for China and the EU is that we still believe WTO is the very important UN agencies and to be supported. So we have a kind of a group. I still remember at the vice minister level, in order to discuss the reforms of the WTO in order to adapt itself to the new situation, including AI. So we have a lot in common. And China is really moving ahead. We have surplus, as you mentioned, but China is not aiming at to have surplus with the European partners. And we have import, the fair of Shanghai, try to invite the European goods coming to China. And well, we need to work both ways. China is open, and it's open wider and wider, and mentioned by President Xi Jinping. But some of those goods, especially the high-tech goods, are not allowed to be exported to China. That's also the concerns of China. So we need to work both ways. Otherwise, the trade deficit of the EU cannot be easily solved. And we welcome the agricultural products from Spain, from Italy, and from other countries. But trade negotiations should be from both sides. And we need to move and in order to have a mutual understanding. We have new areas of cooperation because we believe EU and China, we all believe in free trade. And we all support WTO and other UN agencies. Climate change, for example, is the area of cooperation. Green economy, new and renewable energy, solar panel, for example, China provides something like 75% of those production produced here in China. Wind power, China is also taking the lead. I mean, EU, as I understand it, is aiming to have 45% of renewable energy in the near future. So we have the area of cooperation, in not only the trade itself, but in technology as well. And EV cars, batteries. I think Chinese companies are now actively trying to invest in different EU member states, including Germany, including your country, in Spain. So we think we can work very hard. I don't know whether it's the right time, to reopen the negotiation of the so-called comprehensive agreement on investment. And that was a little bit, quiet for many years, starting from 2020, when President Xi Jinping and other European leaders saying that we have finished our technical discussion and, moving to the approval level, but because of the sanctions of both sides, now it's almost dead. But I think it's quite important for us to work on that. And I hope both parties, and including our Ministry of Commerce and those, trade negotiators in Geneva, in Brussels, can think about how, in what way we can restart this very important negotiation. I think that it's good for both. China treats EU always as a partner. As I mentioned, I was 12 years as a DG of the European Department. We never think EU is our rivalry. And I hope the EU will treat China the same as a partner, economic partner, trading partner, but not necessarily systematic rivalry. If we can think the same line, I think the cooperation between China and EU will be on the right track very soon. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll start our roundtable discussion. So perhaps Fabian, you've been traveling back and forth for many times. We'll start from you. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you also to CCG, Henry and Mabel, for the cooperation, and to the EU for the support for this project. I want to also thank very much participants, these important discussions, including our European and Chinese think tank partners. This session has been under the label of uncertain times. I would say it's more than uncertain. We live in turbulent times. And that also means we live in times where there's a high downside risk for all. Why is that the case? We live in a world where geopolitics drives geoeconomics, where the balance between security and openness has shifted, where the mercantilistic impulses are strengthened. We live in a world of multipolarity, but this is not an ordering principle. It is a challenge for multilateralism at this moment in time, and multilateralism is weakening, which also means that achieving global commons becomes harder. Climate change, sustainable economic development, the prevention of conflict. This uncertainty, this instability will inevitably impose a cost in human terms, politically, socially, economically. And I think we are going to see that it will weaken economic globalization. Companies, for example, will be more reluctant to make cross-border investments given the uncertainty they're facing. I think it's important in that context to look at the bilateral relationship. But to do that, it's very important that we understand both sides of that relationship. And for Europe, the world has been changing over the last years. It has changed with two watershed moments. One is Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its aggression against Europe. And the other has been the election of Donald Trump for the second time. These are fundamental shifts. They end the post-World War II era, and they have led to a changing in the relationship between Europe and the United States. But I want to emphasize in that context that does not mean a decoupling from the United States. The United States will continue to be closely linked to Europe, and it is also important to recall that the United States is not Trump. There is a difference. But Europe has been changing as a result. We are discovering our own agency. We are growing up, acting in common. Europe is not divided, on the contrary. There is no real difference on these fundamental issues. I would not take some of those isolated voices of dissent as a sign of fundamental division. We are doing more together in areas we have not fully explored before, such as defense and security, involving partners even outside the European Union. For example, the relationship with the UK has become very much closer. What will continue to dominate the European debate is our defense against Russian aggression. That is the prism by which we will see our interactions with the rest of the world, especially if, not even if, especially if there is some form of peace deal. Because in Europe, we know that a peace deal has to be lasting, has to be sustainable, and cannot be built on violence. It cannot be built on war-shifting borders. In Europe, we are well aware what happens in the long run if war is allowed to alter the borders of Europe. It is a path which leads to more conflict, which will mean that Europe will have to build its defenses in the coming years. So what does all that mean for our relationship with the rest of the world? Of course, we will work together with those who share our values, who share our interests, but we will also do it alone if we must. Because our economies, our competitiveness are important, they are crucial, but our security is paramount. We have to be able to live in security, and that means we have to continue to defend ourselves and to help Ukraine to defend itself against Russia. Of course, there are many areas, and many have been mentioned, where EU and China share common interests, share the wish to work together, to cooperate. But we have also heard about some of the question marks economically, politically, and they are linked to the issues I've mentioned just now. So I hope it is clear where Europe stands on these issues, what will be the filter which Europe will look at the world for the coming years. And we are watching with interest where China will position itself. And we will certainly have interesting, unfortunately also uncertain times, years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fabian. I now would like to invite Hongjian, a non-resident senior fellow CCG professor at the Academy of Regional and Global Governance at Beijing Foreign Studies University, to take the floor. Hongjian, please.
Thank you, Chair. 很高兴啊，这个一年一度。
I'm very happy to attend this annual forum. CCG has provided such a fabulous platform. This year marks the 50th anniversary of EU-China relations. And in China, we say that when you're at 50, you know what your mission is in life. In China, we also say that often you don't get what you wish. At the 40th anniversary, we thought that China and Europe could seize an opportunity, a period of opportunities to lay a sound foundation for future development. Unfortunately, 10 years ago, many things happened in Europe. There was a refugee crisis in Europe, and then Mr. Trump, and then Brexit. Seems that we missed some opportunities. We didn't really understand the unique value of EU-China relations. And also there's some misconceptions. 10 years ago, most of the Chinese believe that once we are developed, many of our problems would just go away. We will have a smoother path of development and a better life. And now we believe that although we are developed, we have more problems and more pressure, just like our bilateral relations. If we compare now and 50 years ago, we are now important trading partners with each other. We have a lot of dialogues, but we are more complicated in our relationship than 50 years ago and more difficult to define. Although people are discussing if there are another period of opportunities in our relationship, not just because Mr. Trump again, also because there was a full cycle of our bilateral relations. We started as strangers, and then we grow familiar with each other and accept each other. And then there were some misconceptions, and Europe wanted to keep a distance with China a few years ago. But now we see that Europe realized that relationship with China should be balanced again. Just now, Ambassador Toledo talked a lot about balance and rebalance. So that's a new understanding in Europe. In the short term, there is a lack of confidence about EU-China relations. There are two things we need to address. First, how to look at the differences between China and EU. 50 years ago, there were more differences. But 50 years ago, China and Europe could move toward the same direction. Now, 50 years later, we have a lot of common ground, and we're very similar. Then at this point, differences have become a problem. This is something that both sides need to think and to find solutions. Another distorted concept is dependence. 50 years ago, Europe and China never doubted that we need to be interdependent. Then we can do business together, we can exchange together. However, today, dependence has become a concern. Why? When European friends are talking about dependence, they are very wary of China. Understand it. Once you are bitten by a snake, you're afraid of ropes for 10 years. But our European friends have been bitten by Russia and US, so they worry that they might be bitten by China. I believe European friends are very wise, and they should be above such an assumption. Over the past 50 years, we have been learning from each other. In recent years, Europe found that China has a successful experience, that is 5-year plan. So EU now has its own industrial policy and long-term strategy. I think that in the next 50 years, because after all, our relationship is still very young, so maybe in the next 50 years, we can have a common planning for, there are 4 re's. First is to reconfirm our original aspirations when we established ties 50 years ago. Because of differences, because we need each other, so we established diplomatic ties, and we should not keep away from each other because of our differences. And secondly, we need to reshape our mutual, our understanding of each other. If European friends are still interested in differences, maybe you should turn your attention more to studying the differences between China and the US. Because in Europe, a lot of discourse is about the US and China as hegemonies, and also to turn attention to the difference between China and Russia. And Europe believed that China and Russia wanted to challenge the establishment. And we also need to understand the difference between EU and US as Western powers. And third is rebalance. Rebalance in terms of interest. China has become a large economy, and we cannot ask the EU to deal with China like 50 years ago in terms of economy and trade. It is not only rebalancing interest, we also need to rebalance for sustainable development. For example, when we face European trade barriers, we need to have new models for cooperation in terms of industrial policies in EV. I agree with Toledo. We should be more ambitious, more courageous, and create a better and more balanced and mutually beneficial cooperation. And the last one is to reconstruct EU-China relations. How? We need to develop our common interest and to shoulder common responsibilities. Many European friends talked about Ukraine. On this issue, there are differences between EU and China, but if we are sober-minded, we know that we have more common grounds than differences on this issue. So we have the joint responsibility in terms of economic cooperation and competition. We should reform rather than rejecting globalization. We should create more space for CCG. And we should build rather than reject multipolarization, whether you like it or not. We need to make analysis of our different experience, understanding of polarity, multipolarity, so that we can build consensus and to build common rules for the world. And then in this turbulent world, we can use reform to counter turbulence and chaos and to get a more friendly and more sustainable environment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Cui. Very comprehensive remarks, very stimulating and constructive. Thank you. You are also a renowned European China affair expert, so we're very happy to have you. Next, I would like to invite Daniela Schwarzer. She's the member of the executive board of the Bertelsmann Foundation and also former director and CEO of the German Council of Foreign Relations, also a well-known expert. Daniela, please.
Thank you very much, Henry. And thank you to CCG and EPC for hosting this dialogue, which I think is of utmost importance. Having listened to the distinguished speakers who took the floor before me, I decided to limit my 3 remarks to my 3 minutes to 3 remarks and to share observations on 3 questions. The first one is, after 50 years of relations, how do we look at each other? Now, I think the debate over the past hour and also this morning gives a lot of food for thought, because we are mutually dependent in many ways. So there is, I believe, a truthful interest to improve the relationship. And yet we have fundamental differences which we cannot negate and which makes this dialogue so important. It is also because both partners over the 50 years lying behind us have evolved so much. We heard about the impressive development of China over the past 50 years, its growth in terms of economic weight, its global outreach, its new partnerships which it has built around the world. But Europe has also changed, and Professor Cui just mentioned the crisis that Europe lived through. I would like to add that through all of these crises, the European Union managed to improve itself and to become a stronger player. This is true for the financial and sovereign debt crisis, which I think also was of interest to China, that it was well managed in the end, where Europe managed to actually manage crisis and change its architecture at the same time. It is true also for, I would say, the way other internal crises have been managed, and I can't go into detail for time reasons, but it is a learning system. And it is a system that has changed over time, and that in particular now is reflecting within itself the new challenges the international order poses. And that is my second point. How do China and Europe look at the world? I think there is a strong overlap in the analysis of the challenge of instability, of the risk of conflict that is increasing around the world, and of course also the big challenge that the United States pose to the multilateral order. We heard that in many contributions. Now, Europe clearly has a keen interest in a rules-based international order. But here again, the conversation with China, in my view, is so important on what those shared principles can be, what they have to be going forward, what kind of cooperation we can have in bilateral and interregional, but also in multilateral fora. And for Europe, of course, in this context, certain principles are non-negotiable. I would say the UN Charter, of course, has to be the base, but it is also the acute reaction to the breach of a fundamental principle of international law, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which from a European perspective is something that needs to be dealt with. And I believe that Europeans need, if they build trust and closer partnerships, need the recognition of our partners to what extent this violation poses a threat to the global community. And my third point is really then how do we think about, given those differences which we have between each other, between the way we look at the world and that mutual interest to actually move ahead. I do believe, and we heard that in the first panel this morning very impressively, that on the first of all, mutual respect and the formulation of the need for cooperation is the base. But I also believe that trust-building measures are needed. As in every relationship, when there is reason for distrust, it needs open conversations, and I appreciate the openness of the conversation in this session. And then it requires, I do believe, confidential conversations, how this trust can be rebuilt. It also requires both partners to recognize how they have been changing. And from a perspective as a European and a German, I will just end on saying that I believe that the European Union, although it has its difficulties, which are non-negotiable, of course they are there, we are at the moment in a phase of transformation of our economic system, adapting to a new world, a new challenge, adapting of our security system as our security order is under threat, but no fundamental transformation of our political system, because we are a rules-based community of democracies. And I believe it is with that vision that Europe will continue to engage in the world for a more stronger multilateral order. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniela. Now I invite Sun Yan Hong, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of European Studies, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, to take the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. It's my great honor to be here to exchange views with so many prestigious European Chinese colleagues. Based on my research interest, my speech will mainly on the economic relations between China and the EU. I will share 3 points of view. The first one is the experience of the past several decades so that the trend of the global economy and the global trade are highly synchronized. The global economy underwent unprecedentedly rapid growth since the establishment of WTO in 1995, especially from 2001, China entered WTO until the 2008 international financial crisis. After the 2008 crisis, the global economy and the global trade entered an unstable period, almost at the same pace. Another important and interesting phenomenon is the changes of the global trade structure in the recent years. Since 2008, we can see the international trade in goods has begun to decline. Because after the crisis, international reliability has declined, and therefore the global value chains have more difficulties to guarantee the production flows. However, the international trade in services is undergoing growth, especially the digital services trade has increased very rapidly. From 2005 to 2024, digitally delivered services trade increased from 1.5 trillion to 3.9 trillion US dollars. So we can get at least 3 implications from these changes. The first one is defending the rules-based multilateral trading system, especially WTO, are very important for the whole world, especially important for the US, because the US, the largest beneficiary of the trade in services. And the second implication is that as for the international trade in goods, since the whole cake is shrinking, so the competition between China and the EU is becoming more fierce, so it should be managed better. The third implication is we are living in the age of digital economy. China and the EU should collaborate to forge a new model to better accommodate competition and cooperation. This is my first point. My second point is that at this critical moment of 50 years anniversary, and China and EU should think beyond our bilateral relations, and we can and should collaborate to take more global responsibilities. I can think of at least global responsibility. The first one is to collaborate to define WTO system. The WTO system showed a lot of resilience in the past several months. We can see that. So abandoning it is not a good solution. Yeah, we can collaborate to push forward its reform. And the second responsibility is to collaborate to push forward the global green transition. Yeah, both China and the EU made commitments and set up concrete goals. And even though we have many competitions in several specific areas, for example, the EVs, but we still have many complementarities in these areas. So we can do something together. Yeah, I think China is already ready, to take more responsibilities in these areas, especially together with the EU. My third point is that at this critical moment, China and the EU, yes, we should sit down and seriously talk about our bilateral issues, just like the ambassador and other experts mentioned, how to view and deal with the trade imbalance, how to deal with the frozen CAI, how to establish a new strategic partnership in green transition, and how to make a breakthrough in cooperation in digital transition. Yeah, addressing all these issues, I think we need more understanding, more trust, and more joint efforts. And lastly, I'd like to add some sentences to respond to the trade imbalance. I highly agree with Mr. Sun Yongfu. Yes, we have, as for the trade imbalance, our China side, we have our concern of importing high-tech devices from the EU. Yeah, we need to import high-tech devices. For example, the lithography machines from ASML. Yeah, because of the pressure of the US, the ASML has been restricting the exports to China. So this is our concern. And the other, area we should look at more is the service sectors. When we look at the trade, bilateral trade, we can't not only look at the trade in goods, but also the trade in services. The European Union has always the trade surplus in service sectors with China. Of course, the scale is much less than the trade surplus of China in goods. But yes, the EU has the trade surplus in services, and now I think European friends, your chance is coming because the Chinese government is announcing to expand the openness in service sectors. You must have noticed that in medical cares, in elderly care services, in all these areas, the European companies have your own advantages. I think given the current situation between China and the US, this is a good opportunity for our European service companies to invest in China, to find market, to find profits in Chinese market. I think this market is especially for the EU companies because only the developed markets has your own advantage in service sectors. So this is my points. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Sun. And next, I'd like to invite Franco Bruni, President of the Italian Institute for International Political Study, ISPI, a well-known Italian think tank.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, my first point is as a European citizen, and as a European citizen, I feel fully represented by the words of Ambassador Jorge Toledo. I think I subscribe everything he said, particularly his words when he went beyond the bilateral relationship with China and he invested issues towards global values. My second point is more philosophical. Okay, we have bilateral relations, and that's fine. They are useful to build multilateral relations, but even multilateral relations are insufficient. Strictly speaking, they can be interpreted in two different ways. As an exchange of favors, where everybody calculates its moves in terms of do this. Okay, you need this, but you have to go beyond this. Multilateral relations become important when they look at the common goods, at the common, those goods that are not pushable, they are not, I mean, individual members of the multilateral situation do not pursue them spontaneously because they don't derive immediate utility from the efforts they do. The secret of successful multilateralism is that common goods are pursued in the long term for the benefit of everybody. And this benefit cannot be discounted at individual level. So that we sit around the multilateral table, we have to sit as members of the whole, not as parts that have to trade benefits with other countries. This mentality has to be stressed a lot, also in Europe, by the way. But in Europe, we do this continuously. We have this duty in our mind. We don't apply it sufficiently, but we have this duty in our mind. We have to do the same at the global level, especially now that this spirit is vanishing completely. It was in the world after the Second World War, but it has now vanished completely. We have to look at this as the target of multilateralism. My third point, if I may, is as an economist, and has to do with the balance of trade of China with the other countries, including Europe. There are many, many issues, obviously, to rebalance world trade. But as far as China is concerned, let me say that the major effort should be done in macroeconomic policies, trying to push consumption. I mean, there are automaticities as when you start pushing consumption in a serious way, also through welfare. China needs welfare, more welfare. If you start pushing consumption, then things adjust. Okay, you will consume things that now you export. Fine, this is not a solution, for instance, of what Ambassador Toledo was stressing, that you should accept more of our goods, and it will come. Start pushing consumption seriously. This is not simple, obviously, because it has a lot of political implications, social implications, delicate implications. You have to change the way many things work in your country, but this should be your major macroeconomic target. And you will see that if you make progress on this field, the balance of, I mean, we have to do a similar task in Europe. We have to push investment, in particular in research, and many of our international problems will be solved. The United States should do his job in terms of cutting the deficit, and this will do a lot of, they're doing the opposite, obviously. So please do concentrate on consumption in your country. Thank you.
Thank you, Franco. And now I would invite Dr. Zhu Feng to take the floor. Dr. Zhu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the CCG for providing this wonderful platform with so many distinguished speakers. So let me start by saying that we're living in testing time, but still not turbulent time. And this time is, I draw some parallel. It's kind of deja vu, right? That we saw 100 years ago. Why that? We had the 1909 and the 1930 tariffs from the US. And we also, in between, we had the Great Depression, we had the Spanish flu, which took a lot of lives in the world. And we also had the First World War. And after that, we had the Second World War. So it was very, very bad time. But still, in between, we had the roaring 1920s. And now remember that we have the roaring 1990s. And we still have the first 5 years of 2000s, which were pretty good. But we had the pandemic, COVID-19. We have the tariff wars, starting with the first administration of Trump. And also, we have the global financial crisis. A lot of things happened in between. So, but we don't want to go back. We don't want to go back to what happened before, 100 years ago. What can we do now to make it better? So, lasting peace and prosperity. That's something that we're trying to seek, right? But after the global financial crisis, we've already seen a lot of things are changing. Slow globalization, or deglobalization. Or in some way, we're seeing that things are going to segmentation. So talking about globalization, I think there are a lot of big changes that happened in the past, particularly in the after the Second World War. I think it was a golden time for globalization. But that was really a globalization on a regional scale, in a sense, mainly in the Western Hemisphere, US and Europe. And it became a real case for globalization on a global scale with the fall of Berlin Wall and the collapse of Soviet Union. And of course, the Chinese reforms and the eventual access to WTO. And we can say that during this period, actually trade and investment were the driving force of global growth and prosperity. Everything was going wonderfully well, in a sense. But still, remember the rise of Japan and Europe in 1960s and 70s. It caused a lot of trouble to the international economic and financial system, a lot of challenges, and it eventually provoked the collapse of part of the Bretton Woods system at that time, 1970s. We remember that. So now we're facing a different challenge. Somebody would say the rise of China, Brazil, and India, the new emerging powers. And I know that Ambassador Toledo was talking about your visit to Heilongjiang. I'm sure that you know pretty much China. China is not really, it's a big country. Let's say you would see the developing part and you would see the developed part. That's why it's very complicated for the world to perceive. It has a very competitive part, but it also has less competitive or still some way that need a lot of progress. So it's a different force. But then if you look at what, say, Elon Musk, he recently posted on X that he said using his XAI Grok chatbot that by PPP, purchasing power parity, actually China's GDP is a little bit over $35 trillion US. US, a little bit less than $29 trillion, and the EU is about $22 trillion. So China is becoming quite competitive in a sense. I know that it probably poses an image that makes a lot of people think about the geopolitical and geoeconomic realignments. We are living in this period in a sense. And I know that EU has defined the relationship as partner, competitor, and systemic rival. The last part I know less, but I will talk a little bit about partnership and competition. I think, I remember there was a report by EU talking about de-risking and decoupling. And I think decoupling will lead eventually to greater geopolitical risk. That's not something we want. From the European experience, actually, in the post-war experience, integration leads to less risks. So we need to talk with each other and integrate in some way. About the partnership, I think it's very important that to realize that the whole relationship is dynamic. EU has a big deficit with China in terms of goods, not as big as with the US with China, but it has a surplus, a small surplus in services with China, right? EU, but deficit. Together now, right? Okay. And I actually quite much agree with what Mr. Bruni was talking about competition, about the potential for consumption. I think there is still some way to go. It takes time to actually go from great industrial country to become a great consumption power. It took a lot of time for England to do it, for Britain to do that, and it took a lot of time for the US to do that. It will be the same thing for China. I think it takes time. And then, of course, I think within this, we would see in a past relationship whether the international economic system would be sustainable or not. It's hard to sustain. We've already seen what happened I think in the last discussions we had with EPC, the Nixon time, a lot of things collapsed. And I think this time we will see a big changes too. In the past, the relationship might be more, in a way, even like Marshall Plan, they would be happy to do that because in a way that would find some grounds for the so-called excess capacity that the US had at that time. And there was a way after the Bretton Woods, the US found a way to, negotiate the overcapacity from Japan and Germany. Now it's the case. I agree with the fair competition part. I think a lot of things needs to be done. But then talking about overcapacity, sometimes we ignore the lasting imbalances, and we look more on the incoming imbalances, the emerging imbalances. Talking about that, for example, aviation industry, Boeing and Airbus, they were heavily, still, in a way, they were heavily subsidized, and they basically supply to the whole world. And then you think about agriculture, it's heavily subsidized in the US and in Europe. So how do you define overcapacity? Does it mean that, do you mean in terms of global supply and global demand? That's something that we need to think about and discuss, but it's an important issue, absolutely very important. So, but going forward, I think we still need to focus on a few things. One of the things that I think we should pick up is the comprehensive agreement on investment. One of the big part is actually about leveling the playing field, like you were saying, leveling the playing field. That was a big section in the agreement. I think it's still a big part. That's something that we need to look. We might not necessarily go back to the original one. I think that was a good point, but we need to redo. We need to look at this again because trade and investment is essential for the integration and for understanding of each other and for prosperity on both sides. And the other thing is the trade agreements. I know that we're in difficult times and probably WTO does not work as it has worked before. And we're in a world that it has become more segmented, but that doesn't mean that we need to stop, particularly when we face a lot of Trump uncertainties. So in a way, I think Europe and China, they're among the biggest, EU and China, they're among the biggest economies in this world. They can actually lead these kind of negotiations. It can be first bilateral, but it can become more a kind of network of agreements. Maybe we can drive this. It's not exclusive. Of course, the US, if they join, that would be great. But it can be a network of agreements that drive the tariffs down, and particularly the barriers, the trade barriers that you were talking about. So let me say quickly about the common grounds that we have. I think it's easier to tackle the common grounds than tackle the hard problem. Doesn't mean that we don't need to think about the hard problems. I think there are a lot of common grounds between China and the European Union. I think first thing is probably on environment and climate. There are a lot of things that these two countries can push ahead. Not only after the Paris Agreement, I think we made a lot of progress. There are a lot more things that need to get done, and I actually see a lot of things are being done. And the leadership, the joint leadership and the joint initiatives are very important in this aspect. And the other thing is digital economy. I think this is important. These are two largest economies, and digital innovations are very important. And these two economies can discuss along with the US, actually, that would be a good thing to talk about common standards and the common standards for different aspects, including the regulatory framework and including how do we do the data, cross-border data transfer. Last but not at least, I think it's important to keep talking, and communications are the key. I think that's probably what we're doing here. If we don't talk, then things go bad. And then coordination among the policymakers, how we deal with these issues. I think a framework and continue in the framework that we have and probably enhance the framework and particularly enhance cooperation is extremely important. Just to sum up, I think, the relationship is about the talk between EU and China, and it's about take and give. It's not something that just, you have to do this, you have to do that. It's negotiating who can do what and who can get what. And going back to the peace and prosperity, I think I'm cautiously hopeful about this relationship and cautiously hopeful about the lasting peace and prosperity.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Zhu. And so our last contributor, but not the least, is Mr. Lukas Tuskelis, President of the Board of the Hellenic Foundation for European and also Foreign Policy. Please.
Thank you very much. Now, in the short time I have available, I shall attempt to look at the bigger picture through European eyes. I mean, for many years, most Europeans, especially those living in Brussels, thought of a world with multilateral institutions and common rules, a world of growing economic interdependence, in which Europe's open economies would benefit a great deal, and a world in which Europe would be able to exert its so-called soft power, for lack of hard power. Now, this is the stuff, if I may put it bluntly, that Brussels' dreams were made of. And these dreams are now gradually turning into a nightmare. Because at the same time, Europeans thought not only that they lived in a world of growing economic interdependence, but they also thought they would be able to continue enjoying the peace dividend that followed the end of the Cold War in Europe. Now, the nightmare consists of war being back. We have two wars, in fact, in our immediate neighborhood. One in Ukraine as a result of Russia's invasion, and the other in Gaza and the Middle East. And both wars affect us directly. We also have a gradual breakdown of rules, a weakening of international institutions, and a pretty major change in our relationship with our biggest ally, namely the United States. Now, in a changing world, you need to constantly rethink and, when necessary, redefine your own goals and the terms of engagement you have with the rest of the world. And this is precisely what the European Union is being called upon to do. You know, of course, that the European Union is a strange political animal. It is neither a nation state nor an international organization. And with the change in the world we're faced with, the EU is being called upon to essentially transform its DNA. And this is easier said than done. Let me give you two examples of what I mean by transforming our collective DNA. The first is that European integration, the European Union, was essentially a peace project. It was peace between European countries, and it was largely inward-looking. Now, we are being called upon to add defense and security to a peace project. We are being called upon to add hard power to soft power. And we are being called upon to think more and more in geopolitical terms. Now, this will mean nothing less than Europe becoming a political adult if it succeeds in doing so. Now, the second example I would give you is that most Europeans, especially again those living in Brussels, thought that the main task was economic liberalization and regulation in a world of growing economic interdependence. And now they realize that in addition to economic regulation and economic liberalization, they need to adopt active industrial policies in a world where other partners also think and behave strategically. And this requires a large transformation, huge transformation in the way Europeans think about it, think about the world. So to conclude, in order not to take too much of your time, if you add security and geopolitics to economics, you change the relationship. But also economic exchange is being changed in the process. So for Europeans, this is not an easy task because we are also not an individual member country. We need to adjust to a changing world and we need to preserve our internal unity. And last but not least, to become more and more a political adult. And that is difficult. But I would hope that in the months and years to come, both sides, the European Union and China, recognize each other's interests and sensitivities, recognize the needs that each side has. For Europeans, it will be essential to preserve our internal unity. And I think would also be important that China respects European unity as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Lucas. So unfortunately we're running out of time, but for the discussion to make some comment, but maybe we just pick one to just 2 minutes. I'd like to have Wang Yiwei. He's the John Monnet Chair Professor and Director of Institute of International Affairs and Director of the Center for EU Studies at the Renmin University, and also non-resident senior fellow CCG. Just 2 minutes.
Thank you. I have two questions to Ambassador Toledo, actually. First question, what are major lessons we can draw from the past 50 years? As Confucius says, the 50 years, it says this, you know the mandate of the heaven, right? So what we know from that. And then future looking, I think China has drafted the 15th five-year plan, the 15th five-year plan. We learn a lot from European, actually, past the five-year plan. So what we can learn more from European Union in a future five-year plan? And what's your expectation from the future five-year plan? So that's basically two questions to you. And then back to my comments to you. I think the President Xi identified the China-EU relations as two markets, major markets for economic globalization, two major forces for multipolar world, two major civilizations for cultural diversity. I think China maybe is the unique country recognized European Union as a civilization. Not a European civilization, but the European Union as a new civilization. It's a human civilization, great innovation, I think. And then reciprocally, we asked you to view China as a civilization as well. Like the famous American sinologist Lu Xinpai argued that China is a civilization, but pretended to be a state. So if you blame so much about China's overcapacity and consumption, rebalance, systematic arrival, whatever, you are not view China as a civilization. Think about that, like consumption. We are students of the Confucians. Confucius always asked us, save more, consume less. So it's our culture. It's not just a so-called rebalance and overcapacity. We should produce more EV cars for the world. So it's not just for the European market. So my conclusion is, so how to understand as a two civilizations, China and the EU? So my suggestion is turn the systematic rival into systematic partner as a civilization, both for European civilization and human civilization, for AI, innovation, climate change, all of this. So views of us as a civilization and thinking globally, not just bilaterally. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Professor Wang. But we're really running out of time. I know Ambassador also has a tight schedule. Perhaps you can briefly answer that, and then we'll conclude by Ambassador Declan.
Very difficult to answer in short time, but I will try. Very complex. I think I had a long speech about lessons learned, but if I would say, if I had to choose one lesson that China has given to the world, is that free market, actually capitalism works. Because in these 50 years, compared to the 40 years before, China has applied, especially in the last 40 years, the market and free market and capitalism to its economy. It has worked very well. In the last few years, it has worked so well that it is this, and I'm going to this overcapacity, it is threatening the balance, the overall balance, economic balance in the world. So it has to rebalance. I mean, we are not telling China to what to do. It's clear, every economist knows that there is a clear imbalance in the Chinese economy. As Professor Franco Bruni has said very well, there is an imbalance in the Chinese economy, which is basically lack of demand or consumption. There is an imbalance in the American economy, which is a huge fiscal deficit, and there is an imbalance in the European economy, which is lack of investment. That's a fact. But overcapacity, which is not even denied now by the Chinese government, they call it something else. They call it involution, they call it rat race, but it's clear. I was the other day in Chengdu, in one of the largest, let's say, new productive forces. They are losing money. Everybody is losing money. Because there is inflation, there is overcapacity. So that's a problem for China. But if it is a problem for China, we have nothing to say. But if it is a problem for us, because of unfair market conditions, and this is the other lesson, that you have to restore fair trade. And it's not there. On the 15th year plan, I don't feel legitimate, but to give lessons or to tell the Chinese government what to do, because they're doing very well. But if I had to, I would say restore fair, level playing field, and you will attract more investment from, if you are interested in European investment. Because I know that European companies are serious, many of them are seriously thinking leaving, because their level playing field is no longer there, because they have difficult conditions, because there are measures that are breaking their business model. So there is a need there for rebalancing, and that's all. And about civilization, make no mistake, everybody knows that China is one of the most important civilizations in the history of humankind. So, and we respect that. We admire many traits of this civilization, and it has nothing to do with consumption or non-consumption. That's a macroeconomic problem, and that's a problem for China, but that it has effects on us, and we cannot afford to let all this overcapacity, rat race, involution, whatever you call, to destroy our industries in Europe. We are not going to do that. So that's very clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Declan, please.
Thank you, Henry. Let me very briefly thank Ambassador Toledo, Minister Peng, former Director General and Senior CCG Fellow Sun Yongfu for their comprehensive, excellent statements at the start of this session, which I think provided a substantial and varied vista for the discussion which we've just had, which was rich and enlightening. I want to thank my co-chair, Henry, and I'd like to thank all speakers and participants. Obviously, I hesitate to make specific conclusions from such a rich and varied discussion. We are in a very challenging geopolitical period, and it is clear from the discussion that the EU-China relationship has not just bilateral, but also global import. It's also, I think, the case that one criterion for a successful relationship is that it should be able to resolve differences as well as mark successes. And insofar as the discussion in this room is concerned, just thinking of a kind of a motto for what we have done and what we have still to do, I'm reminded of a classical Chinese idiom, which is 白车赶头，共进一步, which I would put in English as mean, we've had a very good discussion, but we have a lot more to discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Declan. You have basically literally translated 100 square meters ahead, but let's have a more square meters ahead in the Chinese saying. That's exactly, I think, the spirit of this roundtable. We're celebrating the 50 years anniversary of China-EU relations, but also we still have a lot of difference, but we identify more and more common ground and more and more common consensus. So this is really the right spirit. I think with more high-level meetings and also summit coming up, we hope that we will have more fruitful discussions in the years ahead. So thank you all very much and appreciate Ambassador Toledo to come. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. And very passionate and very interesting and very rich, and I hope very promising in the future between China and Europe. So this concludes this first session, second session of this morning. So now is lunchtime. 所以现在我们进入到午休时间。再次感谢各位嘉宾的到来，以及欧盟驻华。
Thank you very much. Again, thank you for coming and